Greetings, everyone. My name is Lena Rodriguez, and I'm the Endowed Director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. Welcome to Supercharge Your Board webinar. Before we start today, I'd like to share a little bit about the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy and our mission. Our mission is to educate nonprofit professionals on topics of fundraising to increase fundraising capabilities. The Institute was started nearly 3 years ago with a generous gift from Mr. Denny Sanford. And today, the Institute has grown to 11 sites across the country. And we are represented by these sites today on the line. So if you allow me, I'm going to take a moment to introduce those sites. We have City University, JFK University in Northern California. We have Maricopa Community College District in Phoenix, Arizona, Xavier University in Louisiana, the National Leadership Institute in Florida, Long Island University in New York, Bellevue University in Nebraska, and Augustana University in South Dakota. So thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to also share a little bit about our program and the feedback that we've received from more than 15,000 nonprofit leaders that we've educated. We're extremely proud of the fact that 99% of all of our participants feel very engaged and energized by our instructors and feel that they can immediately apply what they've learned after they have attended a session, a webinar, or a training. Okay, so now to the logistics. If you're tweeting with us today, please use the hashtag SIPWebinar. We also want to make sure that this webinar is engaging, so if you have any questions, feel free at any time to use the Q&A section. All right, so let's begin. Before we start, I want to introduce the foundation of our curriculum. Everything that we teach at the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy revolves around this cause-selling cycle. And you can see that there are 3 phases of the cause-selling cycle, and we have multiple modules and trainings that address all of these various approaches that fall within the 3 phases. I also like to point out that part of this cycle, another circle, would run on the outside of the cause-selling cycle, and that is the relationship building or the cultivation. That is an ongoing activity, and we're going to talk a lot about that today in our webinar. Along that same theme with relationship building, I'd like to add this slide in there to share the traditional model of relationship building, where a majority of our time is spent on the person speaking to the donor and telling and qualifying and pitching. The current model that we focus on at the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy really involves relationship building. So it's the listening, it's the building trust, it's the probing and asking questions. And you'll see that model is the one on the right. And that's the one that we're going to focus on in all of our curriculum, and we'll be talking a lot about that today. So speaking about our particular moderator for today, I'm delighted to have Todd Schultz, who is the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at the San Diego Symphony Orchestra, present with us today. Let me just share a little bit about his background. He has over 30 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, specifically in fundraising, strategic planning, marketing, and public relations. He served, as I said before, as the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at the San Diego Symphony. In previous positions, he has completed campaigns that range over $80 million. So we have quite an expert today with us. A little bit about his educational background. He received his Certified Specialist in Planned Giving degree at Cal State Long Beach, and he holds a dual BA degree in Modern Language and Mass Communications from Kansas State University. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Todd Schultz.
Thank you very much, Lena. It is wonderful to be here today, and I'm looking forward to this webinar. And to start things off, I just want to go back and reference the slide that you just showed about relationship model of asking. I could not agree with that more. It is absolutely the model that I hope that we follow here at the Symphony, and it certainly is. It leads to success in focusing on the relationship with the prospects and the donors. The first real question here is for all of you. We would like to know what you'd like to learn today. If you would type your comments into the chat form, we will keep an eye on those, and as we get into the presentation, and certainly when we get to the Q&A at the end, we will try and cover anything that you're asking about. One question that we did get early on was from one of you who is with a smaller organization, and I want to reassure you that we have in mind, and certainly I have in mind, that all of the ideas presented today are relevant to large and small organizations. My first job was with a small company, and so I really remember when you're a one-person shop in the fundraising or the marketing department, that you go to conferences and you hear presentations, you think that doesn't apply to me, but really I'm hoping that anything that we cover really does apply to all of us.
So before we get started, let's look at some questions that we have here so that we can go ahead. For example, Alan is saying, you know, how do we cultivate high quality board members and fundraisers? We also have, how do we fully engage our board in fundraising, obviously, and how to encourage their involvement. And also, you know, how to give, Tara says, for example, how to give my board the tools they need to remove their trepidation of being directly involved in fundraising. There is a lot more that is coming in from Robin, for example. You know, as much as it was supercharging our board, she needs assistance in cultivating the board and engaging them. And also how to move from a lunch club to a fundraising club. So a few comments here, and if you have more, feel free to add those comments during the webinar, and also use the Q&A box. And then also Diane says, thank you for the comments on small organizations. All right, and one more from Tara, how to get diversity infused onto my board. So just a few comments, but go ahead, Todd, and continue.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And pretty much everything that was referenced there will be included in the notes today. So I think what we're covering is exactly what you're asking, and we'll love to have your feedback back as the webinar progresses. This first note is really an overarching thought about your board and keeping in mind who is on your board for healthy decision-making and healthy and successful fundraising. And one of the overarching thoughts that I wanted to reference going into this is that we in the fundraising department, I really believe that it is incumbent upon us as the advancement or the development department to create a space for major donors that does not necessarily put them on the board. I have been with organizations that have quote unquote sold board seats to major donors, and it's not uncommon, and it certainly makes a lot of sense because a major donor, you want them on the inside really learning about the organization. But there are certainly some people who come along who are not necessarily great board members. They aren't interested in meetings, they aren't interested in financials. And I do believe that it's important for us as a fundraising department to identify those people and create fundraising programs that give them a space to participate without necessarily having to sit on the board, where they feel engaged, they feel connected to the organization without that board seat. I also think that we need to look at the qualifications for our board, and you will have your own based on whatever your mission or vision for the organization is, but commitment to the organization, commitment to what you do is critical, not only for their engagement as a board member, but also for their participation as a fundraiser. I know that when I'm asking for a gift for an organization, if I am passionate about its mission, I am going to be much more effective in making that request because it is real, it is honest, and it is genuinely coming from me and my belief system. And so one of the things that I will touch on going forward is that honesty, that people can really sense your genuine belief in that mission. And it's critical that that be a part of your board members as they come on the board, that they're committed to your organization. Now, beyond that, you need judicious and thoughtful partners at the table. You need collaborative people. You need certainly a capacity to give, because these are the leaders of the organization, so they do need to be supporting your organization. You need connectors in the community, and in some ways you need names that impress. A lot of times you need names on your masthead that people look at and say they're business leaders and they're leaders in the community who believe in this organization, and therefore it gives some credibility to you as well. So those are some notes on your board makeup. We talk a lot about diversity on the board, diversity in many different ways. It's not just this sort of the traditional term of diversity in ethnic and socioeconomic makeup or geographic, but it serves in numerous areas to enhance your organization. So certainly when we talk about diversity, we may talk about expertise in different areas, professional areas. You might be looking at a building project, and you may want people who are familiar with land development on your board. You may want an attorney on your board because there will be legal issues, and it's nice to have somebody at the table who comes from that background. You may want entrepreneurs. You may want different kinds of people specifically because of their advice. However, I also keep in mind that although I have somebody who specializes in land use or somebody who specializes in legal issues at the table, it's not the primary reason they're at that table. That we may call on them from time to time for that expertise, but we're looking at them as people from a bigger, larger perspective of who they are from their position on the board. We're looking for their connections in the community. So if you have people who are in the legal profession or the biotech world, or if different industries in your community, they will have circles of friends, they will have spheres of influence that are unique to them, and therefore they are bringing new people to the table. There are people out there who are noticing that they are on your board. And so having people who are from a variety of different areas of your community, either regionally or professionally or socioeconomically, they each bring connections to different areas of your region to your organization, and therefore can connect you to potential funders. If everyone on your board goes to the same country club, if everyone on your board is from the same neighborhood, if everyone on your board is from the same profession, you are not really reaching a broad range of your community. And so thinking about who can we get from different areas of the community is critical. But the other area that I think is sometimes overlooked and maybe intrinsic in this process is approaches to decision making. Actually, last night is a perfect example. I was at a concert with some donors, with a friend, actually, they're friends and donors. And the husband is an attorney, and he was talking about being at a meeting where everyone around the table was an attorney, and and how nothing was getting done. And his wife made a comment. She said, "Can you ever imagine getting a decision made where everyone around the table is an attorney who's trained to be a professional arguer, but not a decision maker?" She said, "Without a judge at the table, there was no decision made." And that is I told them about today's webinar, and I said, I'm going to use that tomorrow, because that's exactly how I see the importance of having decision makers at the table, of a diversity of professions at the table. If you have only accountants at the table, every decision that is put forward in front of the board for consideration is going to be approached from a relatively black and white world. It's people who are trained to think in a black and white way, but there are many different gray areas along the way. And so I love to sit in a board meeting and look around the table and see how different people approach the same question from a different perspective. How an entrepreneur will totally think about a question in a different way than a land development person or an attorney or an accountant. And so when we think about a range of board leadership and diversity on the board, that is a key element. It's about having different minds around the table who can help guide your organization.
Todd, this is Lena. Before we go on
Yes.
to the next slide, we have a relevant question from Yvonne. And the question is, how do you really identify those individuals that are passionate about the mission that could serve on the board?
Well, we go to our board members and we look to them for advice. We will put together actually a wish list of the kinds of people we want on our board. Maybe that's by region, by profession, by, who knows, country club, by look at your community and see where are the different say, spheres of influence, I guess, in your community that you would like connected with your organization. And also look at your board and say what you're missing. Do you not have any given profession? For example, here in San Diego, the biotech and the high-tech world are a huge part of San Diego. So we look at our board and we say, do we have that community represented on our board? And if we don't, then we will look at the local business journal, print, the top businesses in town, and we look at them, and we look at the leadership, and do any of those organizations contribute? Oftentimes we will pull those lists and go to our donor database and see, has the CEO of this company ever made a gift to our organization or attended a performance? And if so, then it's already shown an interest in our mission. So we end up doing a lot of research on the executives of those companies to try and find the ones who have shown an interest in our organization.
Thank you for sharing that strategy.
So the crux of this presentation really is for us to always know that everyone can be a good fundraiser. Years ago, I read the book The Tipping Point, and the author is failing me right now, but it's a brilliant book on marketing and how trends will tip a product or into a big success. And so there may be a product coming along, and at some point something tips it into becoming a major successful product. And in the book, it talks about the different kinds of people who are either early adopters or connectors, different kinds of personalities that lead to that success. Now, as I was reading it, I was thinking, we have a variety of tasks that are required in the fundraising process. And we have board members who balk at the idea of participating in fundraising. But when you look at your board, every one of them has qualities, personality qualities that would lead them to be able to do one of the aspects of fundraising. And so I want us to keep in mind that this idea that everyone has the capability to be a good fundraiser. And so as people come on the board, it's encouraged to, it's important to establish from the very beginning that fundraising is an expected board activity. You should always make it clear that they are capable of helping. Fundraising can seem daunting, it can seem mysterious, and it's our job to really remove some of those mysteries and help them discover what this relationship building process is all about. That asking for money is only a small piece of fundraising. Another important aspect of this is to make it clear that what they are doing is important to the end result. And so as we get into this, we'll talk about prospecting and cultivation and stewardship. And a board member needs to understand that what he or she is doing is valuable, that is value. They may not be asking for money, but sharing their experience or saying thank you is critical to the process. And they are participating in fundraising when they're doing these elements. And so reassuring them that they are helpful and they are being participatory in these other areas, even though they don't feel like they're a fundraiser, reassure them that they really are, that they fit into the bigger picture. It is vital, and this is actually a marketing 101 tool, that we educate, that we educate our salespeople so that they can tell the case of your organization. Board members must be able to really describe the mission of the organization and explain why it's important. And so it's important for us to train them in a clear and concise way how to tell the mission of your organization. You can give them talking points. Board members love to talk about your organization, or at least I hope they do. And if they're at a cocktail party or if they're at a dinner party, they're going to be more inclined to talk about your organization if you have given them some easy statistics to remember that impress. Because people love to tell impressive stories, particularly about organizations they're involved with. And so we, for example, here at the Symphony, 3 years ago, our summer season sold about $2 million in sales, and over the last 2 seasons, we've increased that to already $3 million. That's an easy thing for people to remember, and we can give it to the board so that they can repeat that story out in the community. And so we try to provide them with anecdotes and information and data that is easy to remember and easy to repeat, and it will help them serve as ambassadors for you. It's about making them confident in sharing your story, giving them a comfort level. We will also write an elevator speech, which has about 10 or 12 bullet points that we think people need to know about our organization. And we provide that elevator speech, we even call it that. We provide it to our advancement committee, to board members, to anyone serving as an ambassador for the organization. I also think it's important for us as staff, and I know there are board members on the call today, by the way, so we'll be speaking to that as well. But as staff, it's important for us to manage up. And what really that really means is partially this training of the board, but it's also making sure that you have your data in order, making sure that you're trying to think 2 steps ahead of them so that you're serving as a guide. A lot of board members are going to be uncomfortable with fundraising. They haven't really done a lot of it, and they are looking to you for your help, for your advice and your assistance. And a critical piece to keep in mind, these are volunteers. We do this every day. We know the data inside and out. We know the numbers, we know the material, and they don't. They may not. If we're lucky, we're the 3rd most important thing in their life. They have their family, they have their career, and I would love us to be number 3. I'm not sure we always are because they have other things in their lives, but at best, we're going to be number 3. And so they have a lot of other things on their mind, and I need to make it easy for them to keep us in mind. And so being respectful of the amount of time that they can give us and respectful of their knowledge level, making sure that I can provide them with just the right information to keep them focused on the project at hand. The role of the development committee really is not necessarily to fundraising. It is, actually I'll advance the slides, and it's not necessarily for asking for money. It's about engaging the entire board in the roles of fundraising, which we'll talk in a moment, and about instilling a culture of gratitude within the organization. That I like to talk to my staff and my board about the importance of the relationship with the donors and the importance of saying thank you. That if we can keep gratitude as a central part of our mindset, it will be apparent to the prospect and to the donor. This goes back to that point I made earlier about being honest. At anything we do, it's going, our ulterior, our deepest intent is going to be transparent and seen by the prospect. And so it's important that we come from a really genuine position of caring about the organization, but also being tremendously genuine in our gratitude. If that has to be a central part of the way we think as fundraisers and as we think as board members. We should never feel entitled to the donor's money. We should always feel grateful for the donor's money. One of the, in this pursuit, one of the instructions that I regularly give at board meetings, and I repeat it over and over, staff probably get tired of hearing it, but knowing that board members are only here periodically, maybe for 4 or 5 meetings a year and then at performances, I think it's incumbent upon repeating those core messages on a regular basis so that they really stay at the forefront of their minds. And one of the things that I've tried to impress upon them is that when they attend performances at the San Diego Symphony, they are not here as a donor to be thanked. They are not here as a subscriber to necessarily participate as an audience member. They are here as hosts. So I want them to walk into our hall and feel ownership. I want, when I talk to our board members, the speech that I give is this. When you come to a concert, walk into the house and envision this as your home. When you are sitting in the audience, you are sitting among your guests. This is your house, this is your living room, and all 2,000 people sitting around you were invited here by you. If that were the case, and you get up at intermission, what would you do as host? You would turn to the person next to you, you would thank them for coming, you would introduce yourself if you don't know them. I'm a board member at the Symphony, we're grateful that you attended tonight, thank you for being here. If you need anything, let us know. I'd love to introduce you to staff, engage them, simply say thank you. That mentality is critical to the board in creating an atmosphere in your organization of welcoming people. People want to give to organizations where they feel welcome. Going back to what Lena was saying earlier, and how I like to talk with my staff about this, is that we should always focus on the relationship with the prospect and with the donor, and never on the money. When you are talking with the donor, your focus should be, or your prospect, and this is also instructions for the board, your focus should be on how can I connect this person better with our organization? How can I introduce them to our executive director, our CEO? How can I introduce them to the people implementing programs? How can I get them engaged in this organization so they really care and they know we care about them? It's got to be genuine. If you are thinking in the back of your mind, how much can I get out of this person? It's going to come across as fake. It will never be sincere if the only thing you're thinking about or your board member is thinking about is how much can they give. You've got to shift that mentality in your organization so that you and they are genuinely thinking of and honestly thinking of, how can I improve this relationship and create a trust between you and the prospect or the donor. A couple years ago, I attended a fantastic seminar in Los Angeles that was produced by the League of American Orchestras, and the presenter was Chuck Loring. So this is a little pitch for him because he's a really brilliant presenter, and we had him come to a workshop for our board. And a lot of this really, what I'm saying today, really aligns with Chuck's philosophies. And one of the things that he did, which I can't really do as a staff member with our board, but it's an important way of thinking for all of you, whether you're on the board or on the staff. In front of our board, 30 in the room, he turned to me and he said, "Todd, how many is on your staff?" And I said, 9. And he said, "So how much money more money could you raise if you had 30 more staff members?" And we all sort of thought, wow, it'd be great. I'd love to have 30 more staff members out there raising money. And then he paused and he said, "Now, how much more money could you raise if you had 30 more bosses?" And obviously the board all laughed because they understood exactly what he was saying, that the board, it's important for the board to think of themselves as extensions of the staff. What can we as board do? Not necessarily what can we as board advise. And now, advice is important, and this is all collaborative, and we do want to work with the committees, but I try to think about, when I'm working with the board, trying to keep them on that track of what tasks can I give them that are simple and easy and attainable so that they can be a success, and so that it helps us achieve our goals at the end of the day. So if you ever have Chuck Loring at one of your board retreats, I suspect he will ask that question, and it actually gets a good laugh. So here we come kind of to the meat of the presentation. When I was at the Old Globe, that's when I was reading that book, The Tipping Point, and I came up with these 4 job descriptions in the fundraising process that I presented to our development committee. And what I said to them is, everyone on our board has the capacity to do some aspect of fundraising. But the problem is, when we ask them to serve on the development committee, you get, deer in the headlights, and the walls go up, and like, "No, I don't fundraise. I'll never ask my friends for money. I don't know. I can't do that. I can't do that." And there are a lot of people who will resist because they don't really understand what you're asking them. It's a big question. Would you help fundraise? What do you mean by that? And so it's important for us to say that next statement, not "would you help fundraise," but rather tell them what their options are. And there are really 4 jobs. There is the job of prospecting, there's the job of cultivating, there's the job of soliciting, and there's the job of stewardship. And really only one of those 4 is asking for money. The other 3 are genuine, critical aspects of fundraising, but they have nothing to do, really, they have nothing to do with asking for money. They have everything to do with relationship development. And so I wrote up 4 job descriptions, one for each of these areas, and we presented them to the board, and we asked the board to pick which area they would go work on. And so what I would like to do for the rest of the seminar is, for the next little 10 or 15 minutes or so, is to cover the these 4 job descriptions, and sort of what is entailed and how these areas can lead to the next area and how they can make your whole fundraising program successful. The prospector is really about providing the staff with names of people in the community. This was actually the first revelation as I was reading the book. I immediately thought of 2 board members that said, I will never fundraise. I will never help with fundraising. Don't ever ask me to fundraise. But those same 2 board members frequently on a Monday morning would call me and talk for an hour and a half about the parties they went to on the weekend, who was there, who invited whom, what they gave, who raised their paddle, who bought an auction item. Critical information. What they didn't realize is although they told me I'll never fundraise, I just don't like fundraising, they were fundraising. They were calling me of their own accord and helping me as prospectors. And so I actually went to those 2 board members and I said, I know you've said you'd never fundraise, but would you serve as a prospector on our board? And the end game here was to make sure that everyone on the board had picked a job, one of these 4 jobs, so that everyone on the board was somehow participating in the fundraising program. So this is sort of an abbreviation of the job description. I wouldn't want it to be very long, but I do want to give them guidance in sort of what their role is as a prospector. So this is the general overview of prospecting, the prospecting role on the board of directors. And again, I'll go back to, I mentioned a minute ago that the job of the advancement or the development committee is not to fundraise, but rather to instill an attitude of gratitude and to build the board as a fundraising tool. And so when I look to prospecting, I'm looking to our committee to help us implement this and the other job descriptions among their fellow board members. Certainly, advancement committee members here at the Symphony will have their own roles, but I want them to be helping us push that out into the broader board. Cultivators for me is one of the most fun, actually. A cultivator, by definition in my mind, is a board member who is willing to engage with someone whom they may not know, and engage with them as a peer. Now, not everybody's willing to do that. The way we do it in the performing arts, and I know some of you are not performing arts, but in the performing arts world, let's say it's a performance. And we have a prospect coming that we want to get to know. I might look at my cultivators on the board and call one and say, you know, you're coming to the same performance as this prospect. I plan to sit you next to them, and they'll be on your right, and their names are these people, and this is how long they've been coming, and et cetera. This is what we know about them. I will want that board member to turn to them during the performance and introduce themselves, to talk to them and say, I'm on the board, we're glad you're here, and have that conversation and engage with them as a peer. It's not asking for money. It's certainly not asking for money. It's way too soon. It's about gleaning from them who they are. The cultivating process really is about sharing, about listening, and about sharing. There's really those, and preparing. I break it down into 3 areas, but listening, sharing, and preparing for an ask. And so it's that relationship development, learning what you can from them and sharing with them as a peer. And this is something that board members can do. Board members can do better than we can as staff, because they are peers in the community. So we will we will work with our cultivators on the board to connect them with prospects. They might eventually take them to dinner before a performance. It depends on the relationship with the people, with the prospect. Some of our board would prefer to serve as a cultivator with people they know, and some of our board are comfortable calling people that they don't know and saying, you know, I'm on the board of directors, and I know you're coming on Saturday night. I was talking to the staff, and we'd love to connect with you as an organization. Do you want to meet me for dinner beforehand, or would you like to meet me for a cocktail at intermission? Again, not everybody's comfortable doing that, and that's why we have 4 job descriptions. But cultivating is really about that relationship development. It's a critical piece.
Todd, this is Lena. I'd like to jump in just for a second. As you're sharing with us about your job descriptions relative to the board, can you just make sure that you put this into the space where this is about all the board, right? This isn't just about job descriptions for a development committee, but you're sharing this information as you've deployed this with your entire board. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll stop for a second. I will say, now this is going to the small and the large organizations as well. It's for everyone. I'm not going to say this is easy. And I'm not going to say that this is something that can be implemented immediately. When I first put this in front of the board about 8 years ago at the Old Globe, we immediately learned that there's a lot of work on the staff side to keep this organized. And so when we get to the end of this, we're going to get to stewards. And I'll tell you, at the Globe, the first thing we did was implement the stewardship section. And we got that piece of it rolling. Then we moved to cultivators. We kind of got the prospectors going. And slowly over time, we had a rhythm and we had a process going. But I'll tell you, it does take work. And so for the smaller organizations, I would actually look to the board to help with that coordination. Maybe one of your advancement committee members is the chair of the stewardship program. One of them is the chair of the cultivation program, and one of them is chair of prospecting. I think solicitation probably should be kept as a staff function, because you will have more information as staff members as to the history of the donors, the capacity of the prospects, et cetera. And so I kind of believe in keeping that as staff driven. But it is important to keep it organized, and it's important to keep it moving forward so that the board has confidence that the program is effective. So, but yes, it is absolutely about engaging the entire board in fundraising.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, and you're welcome to jump in at any point. On the solicitors, I actually look to solicitors not necessarily as the person who says in the meeting, would you give $10,000 or pick a number. The solicitor might be somebody who calls and asks for the meeting. Maybe it's the board member who says, would you have lunch with the CEO and me? Would you have lunch with the artistic director and me? Would you join us for a backstage tour and a conversation about giving? It's someone who's willing to open the door. It's somebody willing to go on the call. It's possibly they're going to help ask for the money, but very likely your CEO or your artistic director or someone on the staff will be participating. In fact, I think that's important that someone on the staff participate, because it helps with continuity in the conversation and in the messaging that you're getting out. And oftentimes the ask will actually happen from the staff, but having a board member present, having a board member as part of the process helps add credibility to the request, because here is somebody who is not being paid. I mean, I will always be a paid staff member, and so as much as I believe thoroughly in our mission, I am paid to believe in it too. And so having a board member who actually is a donor making that request is much more meaningful than my being the sole person at the table. So this again goes to the importance of having them there as peers. Another role in the solicitor might be is doing a follow-up call after a letter's been sent or after a request has been made. Maybe the artistic director has gone on a call and asked for the gift. The next day, the board member could call and say, hey, I know you met with our organization yesterday. I know they asked you for a gift. I really encourage you to do that. So again, not every board member is going to be comfortable doing that, and so a solicitor has to be somebody who's willing to follow through on this job description. Stewards, this is my favorite section. This goes back to our conversation earlier about the importance of gratitude and instilling an atmosphere of gratitude in your organization. I'm going to go back to Chuck Loring. He gave a great example in our presentation. I'm just going to quote it. So this is attributed. So it's not mine, but he presented it beautifully. He turned to one of our board sitting on the front row at the board retreat, and he pointed to her and he said, earlier when I asked for hands up, who would be willing to help fundraise? You, or who would not want to fundraise? You raised your hand. And he said, so let me tell you this story. Let me ask you a question. Your organization has someone, a woman who lives in a very wealthy area of town. She made a $1,000 gift. Would you be willing to call and thank her for that gift? And the board member said, absolutely. He said, so here's a scenario. Let's say that you call and thank the person for a gift, and you strike up a friendship. You live near her. You take her to a performance at some point. You might go to lunch with her. You might bring her backstage and introduce her to the executive director and go on a backstage tour. Over time, over the course of the year, you've connected well with her. You've engaged her as a peer, as a friend. You've developed the relationship between her and you and the organization. A year after the anniversary of that $1,000 gift comes around, by this point, some of the staff know her. The executive director knows her. They reach out to her and ask, or maybe another board member, but one of them, because you don't want to ask for money, one of them calls her up or makes a request and she increases to $10,000. Who raised that money? Well, it's clear. The board member who spent the time with her over the last year saying thank you was the one who raised the money. It wasn't me as the head of the fundraising program who asked for the $10,000. It wasn't our CEO. It was the board member who invested the time in the relationship, who called to say thank you. And so the stewardship committee is hands down the most important aspect of this program, in my opinion. And so this is why at the Globe, when we realized that implementing all 4 of these job descriptions at once was not really going to be logistically possible with the size of staff and implementing systems, etc., we focused on stewardship. And we found board members in each area of town who agreed that if a new donor gave who lived near them, that they would be willing to take the number and either call and say thank you, to send them a handwritten note, to take them to lunch or coffee, meet them at a performance, invite them to our meet and greet with the CEO, etc. So the stewards were regionally positioned around the community, and we used them to connect them with new and donors who are making new gifts and increased gifts. the other sort of wonderful ulterior motive on our part as staff, and my part, is that over time, some of these stewards who told us they would never ask for money developed into wonderful cultivators. I know a woman who told me she would never ask for money, she would never serve on the development committee, but she did agree to be a steward, and she loved it. She loved calling and thanking people for making a gift because she loved the organization. She really believed in it, and she was so grateful. It was deep within her heart. She cared about the organization, and she was glad they gave. And her genuine belief and her genuine gratitude could be heard over the phone. And she developed relationships with several donors who, over time, increased exponentially their giving. So of all of this presentation, I would say the real focus here, at least for starters, could be on the stewardship. And so we, here at the Symphony, actually look at ways that we could use our board to thank donors. I like to make sure that every time we have a performance coming up, I send an email to our board with the seat locations of all of our major donors who are going to be in the house. So that if you are a board member and you're seated in the center of our grand tier, you know who those people around you are who made gifts. And because you just got an email from me about 3 hours before the performance, you're reminded, oh yeah, I see their face all the time, and I remember that Jane Smith, and I always forget her name, but because I got that email, I can remember, and I can actually walk over and say, thank you, appreciate you supporting the organization. I want to give them tools to be successful as stewards. And I also want them to know how critical their role of saying thank you is in the process of fundraising. So
Thank
Lena
you,
and
Todd.
Emmanuel, I think that's
Yes.
the end of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions you've got on the chat.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of questions, and I want to thank you for sharing the ingenious tool of the job descriptions for board members. A couple questions. One would be, how do you continue a culture of passion and enthusiasm with your board members?
Well, our CEO does a really great job of that. She's inspiring. Every board meeting, she includes a presentation about the mission of the organization. And so they get regular updates on, it's not just the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of the organization at the meeting, but rather there is an inspiring moment or aspect to the meeting that helps engage them. So keeping them informed, keeping them knowledgeable and on the inside of the organization, I think is probably the way that we are most successful in that.
So that constant communication and cultivation, as we talked about earlier in the model, really keeping that continuing cultivation process going.
Yeah, I also will say that you as staff and board leadership as well, we know who's most engaged. I mean, any of us can think of our board. And I will say, I see any group of human beings probably on a bell curve as far as level of engagement, that if you have any group, there is a small group at the front end that are highly, highly engaged, and they gravitate toward leadership. There's a huge group in the middle of the bell curve that are engaged. They love the organization. They're not really driven to be the leaders, but they really value it. And then there's a small group at the other end who don't show up at meetings, and maybe they care or they probably write their checks. But I accept the fact that any organization is going to have all three groups. And so one of the things that I try to do is keep my eye on those people who are less engaged to try to connect with them as much as possible.
Todd, you had mentioned earlier in this webinar about the importance of messaging and the fact that everyone really needs to be speaking from the same talking points. We have a question from one of our participants where they wanted to know what are those elements that you consider important as part of a pitch or as part of those talking points?
Well, some of that's going to come from strategic planning. Some of that's going to come from your organizational leader. 20 years ago, I worked for a company that the organization had a reputation because of its talking points as being fiscally responsible, but the leader of the organization really wanted to be known for its artistic quality. But whenever I saw him speak, he crowed about how fiscally responsible the organization was. It really boiled down to his natural speaking points were what all of us ended up using. And we had to pivot a little bit intentionally internally to say, all right, our reputation in the community is fiscal stability, but we really want to be known for artistic quality. So we have to consciously think about what we're saying every time we get in front of a group, the appeal that we make and the points that we talk about. And so when I referenced the elevator speech at that organization, we resorted those talking points and moved the ones that we believed were most important, and that actually came out of a strategic planning meeting. We moved the ones that we thought were most important up to the top of the list. And it's about
wonderful.
So every organization that I've known, and I'm sure you all will have the exact same experience, it develops a corporate personality from the personality of the leader. So when I worked for an organization that had a general director who was OCD, we all became a little bit OCD. We were upset. It was his natural impulse to be so tremendously organized, sort of, it filters down. When I worked for a wildly visionary leader, in Los Angeles, my supervisor, the head of our organization, was Placido Domingo, and Mr. Domingo is incredibly visionary on an international level. You could feel yourself being more visionary because you knew that those ideas would be accepted when brought to the table. When I worked for somebody who was neurotic, I'll tell you, everybody became neurotic, and it is a natural aspect of the organization that we, as staff, take on that sort of the personality of the leadership, and so that messaging also filters down. So the point of this is to make sure that you are, as a fundraising staff and as marketing and PR staff, that you are working with that leader to ensure that his or her talking points are consistent and clear and exactly aligned with the goals of the organization, because whatever he or she says is going to filter out through the board and through the staff.
Great point. Well, thank you, Todd, for sharing your words of wisdom. You taught us a lot today, a lot about diversity of a board structure, the importance of the talking points, as you just shared. I really appreciated the section on gratitude. I think that is so critical, the gratitude that we have not only to our board members, but to our donors. And I really appreciated the statement that you made about grateful to your donors for the gift and not to feel entitled to that gift. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it as well when you talked about board members owning their role as hosts to the organization. I thought that was very insightful. Again, your focus on the relationship was really right in line with what we teach here at the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, and really seeing your board members as extensions of our staff and not necessarily as additional bosses. And finally, thank you for sharing the job descriptions, because again, I think that's an ingenious tool that we can use with our boards. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today and let you know that we will have follow-up sessions that address many of your questions that were about the actual tools that you can use with your boards, whether it be the letters or the outreach and those types of things. So please keep an eye on our website for upcoming webinar topics, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, Todd, and thank you to the audience.